Good day, accountants. In this video, we will be discussing about leases or the lease accounting. It is divided into two parts. But for now, we will be focusing on the part 1, which tackles the accounting needed for the part of the lessee. In this video, we will be focusing on 4 major points. First, the lease. Second, accounting for the part of the lessee. Third, the components of lease payments. And lastly, other included in the lessee accounting. IFRS 16 is the new lease standard. IFRS 16 defined lease as a contract or part of contract that conveys the right to use an asset, the underlying asset, for the period of time in exchange for consideration. So ano ba yung mga kadalasang part niyan? Yung mga large group of lease equipment involves yung mga information technology equipment, yung transportation such as truckings, aircraft or rails, yung construction, and also the agriculture. It is stated that there are two parties involved in a lease contract. Una na dyan is the lessee. Lessee is the entity that obtains right to use an underlying asset for a period of time in exchange for consideration. Siya yung binigyan ng right para dun sa may underlying asset. Next is the lessor. The lessor is the entity that provides the right to use an underlying asset. Meaning to say, siya yung may-ari ng asset at pinaparentahin niya kay lessee. So ano ba yung mga benefits ni lessee? First is the 100% financing at fixed rate. Second is protection against obsolescence. Third, flexibility. Fourth is less costly financing. Less costly financing kasi hindi na kailangan bumili ni lessee ng equipment kasi kung yung equipment na yon ay gagamitin lang for a short period of time, nag-lease na lang siya para hindi mas malaki yung mapagastos niya. So sa part naman ni lessor is often provides profitable interest margins. Second is it can stimulate sales of a lessor's product. Third, it often provides tax benefit to various parties in the lease. Fourth, it can provide a highly residual value to the lessor. So himayin natin yung definition of a lease. It is said that it must be identified asset. Pag sinabi natin identified asset, the asset is typically identified by being explicitly specified in a contract, sinabi dun sa may kontrata, or implicitly specified when it is made available to the customer, kapag naging available na sa customer. So, under nyan is no substantive right to substitute and no benefits from substitution. The second component is there must be right to control the use of an identified asset. The lessee must have right to obtain substantially all the economic benefits and right to direct the use. So, let's elaborate the right to control the use of an identified asset. When we say right to obtain substantially all the economic benefits, the customer can obtain substantially or all the economic benefits from the use of the asset by having exclusive use of the asset throughout the period of use. Meaning to say, kung gaano katagal niya rentahan yun, kung ano man yung kikitain dun sa may asset na yun, yung economic benefits, dapat may right dun si lessee. Second is right to direct the use. Pag sinabi natin right to direct the use, a lessee must have the right to direct how and for what the purpose of the asset. Kung ano ba yung, kung saan niya ba gagamitin, kung saan niya pwedeng gamitin, or kung ipapalis niya ba sa iba, nasa decision niya yun kasi siya yung may control ngayon dun. Let's move on to the part of accounting for the lease on the part of the lessee. Under IFRS 16, it states that all leases are accounted by the lessee as a finance lease. Paano ba yun pag sinabing finance lease? Nagre-record ka ng right of use asset and lease liability. Under IFRS 16, sinabi niya na kapag si lessee pumasok sa isang lease contract, yung classification agad nun is a finance lease. Pero pwede rin namang maging operating lease using these two optional exceptions: short-term lease and low-value lease. Take note, a lessee may or may not apply the operating lease accounting if the lease is short-term or if the underlying asset is low-value. It is their choice. Pero kapag ka si lessee, kapag ka yung short-term lease or yung low-value asset niya is classify niya as an operating lease, ang mangyayari doon is he or she must apply the lease payments as an expense on either straight line basis over the lease term or another systematic basis. So, nabanggit na natin kanina yung short-term lease and the low-value asset. Kapag sinabi natin short-term lease, typically it has 12 months or less at the commencement date of the lease. At wala siyang purchase option. Kapag sinabi naman nating low-valued asset, it is the underlying asset is low of value or the value assessment is based on the value of asset when it is new. A lease of an underlying asset does not qualify as a low-value lease if the nature of the asset is such that the asset is typically not of low value when new. For example, meron kang kotse, ang value niya is 200,000. Ang market value na lang niya ngayon is 200,000. Pero kapag bago siya, ang value niya is 500,000. So, hindi siya ma-considered as low-valued asset. That's low-valued asset. So, ano ba yung mga typically classified as low-valued underlying asset? Ito yung mga personal computers, yung mga office furnitures, and other equipment. As stated earlier, all leases shall be accounted for by the lessee as finance lease. Nabanggit na natin kanina yan under PFRS 16. So, sa recognition, at the commencement date, the lessee shall recognize a right-of-use asset and lease liability. So, ano ba yung right-of-use asset? Yung right-of-use asset is defined as an asset that represents the right of a lessee to use an underlying asset over the lease term in a finance lease. So, paano ba siya mini-measure? Yung initial measurement niya is the cost. So, ano ba yung part ng cost ng right of use? Una na dyan is the present value of lease payments or the initial measurement of the lease liability. Second is lease payments made to lessor at or before commencement dates, such as lease bonus and less any lease incentives received. 3 is the initial direct cost incurred by the lessee. And 4 is the estimate of cost of dismantling, removing, and restoring and the underlying asset for which the lessee has a present obligation. Pag sinabi nating lease bonus and lease incentives are payments by the lessor to the lessee associated with lessee or the reimbursement or assumption by the lessor of the cost of the lessee. So, paano naman yung subsequent measurement? It is measured at cost model. To apply the cost model, the lessee shall measure the right-of-use asset at cost less any accumulated depreciation and the impairment losses. The right-of-use asset is also depreciated. The lessee shall apply normal depreciation policy for right-of-use asset. The lessee shall depreciate the right-of-use asset over the useful life of the underlying asset under the following condition. Una, kapag may transfer of ownership. Transfer of ownership at the end of the period. And second, reasonably certain to exercise purchase option. Kapag i-exercise ni lessee or bibili ni lessee yung underlying asset at the end of the period dun sa pinapag-usapan nilang option price. Paano naman kung wala yan dalawa na yan? If there is no transfer of ownership and no purchase option is reasonably certain, the lessee shall depreciate the right-of-use asset over the shorter between the useful life of the asset and the lease term. Kung ano yung mas maikli dun sa may dalawa na yun. So, kung sa may debit side, merong right of use asset, dito naman sa credit side, merong lease liability. Sabi dito, the lessee shall measure the lease liability at the present value of lease payments. Second, the lease payments shall be discounted at the effective interest rate. Kung ano yung implicit rate dun sa may contract. And third, in the event that it is impracticable to determine the implicit rate, the lessee uses its incremental borrowing rate. Ano ba yung interest rate implicit na sinasabi natin or yung effective interest rate? Ito yung interest rate na magpapa-equal dun sa may present value ng lease payments plus the unguaranteed residual value dun sa may fair value ng underlying asset and the initial direct cost of the lessor. Since nabanggit na natin yung lease payments, move on tayo dun sa may components ng lease payments. Ano-ano ba yun? Components of lease payments. The lease payments comprise the following payments for the right of use the underlying asset during the lease term. Una is the fixed lease payment. Second is the variable lease payments. Third is to exercise price of purchase option if the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the option. Second is the amount expected to be payable by the lessee under a residual value guarantee. And lastly is the termination penalties if the lease term reflects the exercise of a termination option. Fixed lease payments are payments made by the lessee to the lessor for the right of use an underlying asset during the lease term. So, under PFRS 16, merong mga examples of lease payments that are variable in legal form but should be treated in fixed in substance. Number one is the payments that must be made only if an asset is proven to be capable of operating during the lease. Second are payments that must be made only if an event occurs with no genuine possibility of not occurring. Third is the payments that are initially variable but for which the variability will be resolved at some point and the payments become in substance fixed when resolved. And fifth, when there is more than one set of payments, only the realistic set of payments must be considered. Variable lease payments are payments made by the lessee for the right of use the underlying asset during the lease term that vary because of changes in facts or circumstances occurring after the commencement date other than the passage of time. In other words, this is the accounting for variable payments depends on the variability nature. For example, is the based on index or rate. Based on index or rate, for example, payments linked to customer price index or benchmark interest rate are included sa may lease payments. Also, others which are based on sales or usage and also the in-substance fixed payments are considered to be variable lease payment. Purchase option is the amount paid by the lessee to obtain a property from a lease contract, mostly service-related contract. The option price is below the fair value of the lease asset. Purchase option, nabanggit ko to kanina. Sinasabi dito na si lessee si lessee at si lessor, meron silang napag-usapan na option price which is lower of the fair value ng asset and merong option si lessee na bilhin yung asset na yun at that price na mas mababa din sa may fair value. So, mat-transfer na sa kanya yung ownership nun. Sa kanya na yun. Residual value. The estimated amount of an asset gained from disposal after the deduction or already at the end of its useful life. A residual value is only guaranteed if it is guaranteed by the lessee or by a party related to the lessee. So, tignan natin yan. Merong residual value, may two types siya, may guaranteed and unguaranteed. Kapag guaranteed, residual value guaranteed is the guarantee made to the lessor by a party unrelated to the lessor that the value of an underlying asset at the end of the lease term will be at least a specified amount. So kapag guaranteed, guaranteed by the lessee, guaranteed by a party related to the lessee, and guaranteed by a party unrelated to the lessor. Kapag unguaranteed residual value naman, it is that portion of the residual value of the underlying asset, the realization of which by the lessor is not assured or is guaranteed solely by a party related to the lessor. So, guaranteed lang siya ng isang party related to the lessor kapag unguaranteed. Lease term. Lease term is defined as the non-cancelable period for which the lease or the lessee has the right to use the underlying asset together with both of the following: the option or the period covered by an option to extend the lease if the lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the extension option. Second, the period covered by an option to terminate the lease if the lessee is reasonably certain not to exercise the termination option. Yung lease term, kasama na siya sa may contract. Identified na siya sa contract kung gaano kahaba kung gaano katagal rentahan ni lessee yung asset or yung underlying asset ni lessor. So let's have this illustration. On January 1, 2020, an entity leased a machinery for 4 years, which is the same as the useful life of the machinery at annual rental or fixed payment of 100,000 pesos payable at the end of the year. The lease provides for a transfer of ownership of the underlying asset to the lessee at the end of the lease term, 12% implicit interest rate. So, let's have the analysis. The solution. We must get the present value. 100,000 yung ihulog niya, yung kung magkano yung rent payment niya. Ita-times mo siya sa may present value of ordinary annuity at 12% with a term of 4 years. So, 100,000 times 3.0373, makukuha mong present value is 303,730. So, at the commencement date, magre-record ka na agad ng right of use asset 303,730 and credit lease liability 303,730. At that year also, you will compute for the depreciation. So, the present value of the right of use asset 303,730 divided by the useful life of the asset, which you will get 75,932. So, at December 31, 2020, magre-record ka na ng depreciation ng 75,932 and accumulated depreciation ng 75,932. Advance rent and lease bonus. Advance rent payment at the beginning of the period and lease bonus amount paid by the lessee to the lessor. Both of these are treated as prepaid rent and recognized as expense under the straight-line basis. These are changes in the scope of a lease, consideration for a lease that was not part of the original terms and condition of the lease. Kapag meron kayong dinadagdag na conditions or other terms dun sa contract nyo, tapos hindi naman siya nakaspecify dun sa may original contract nyo, that is classified as lease modification. Leasehold improvements. Leasehold improvements are recognized as asset separate from the right of use and depreciated over the short term of the life of the improvements and the remaining lease term. So, i-recognize mo siya or i-depreciate mo siya over kung ano yung mas maikli dun sa may life na improvement or dun sa may remaining lease term. This sums up the part 1 of the lease accounting. Stay tuned for the part 2 to learn more for the lease accounting in the part of the lessor. Thank you and God bless.